some of these are harder than the ones we've been doing in class, so I just want to show you a couple of examples. For if you get something like this, where you have no parentheses, the goal is going to be the same. You need to get x by itself, but you have x's on both sides, or you might have them on the same side, it depends. So you want to get all of your x's, or whatever the variable is, on the same side, so I can either move 8x over, or move px over. I'm going to choose to move 8x over. I also want to get rid of anything that does not have an x, so I can get rid of r, move it over to the right, since I moved 8x to the left. So that would give me negative px plus 8x equals negative 2 minus r. And then this next part you kind of have to think about. If I had something where x was outside of parentheses, I would distribute to whatever's inside. I kind of want to get to this process, but right now I have x's in both of these, so I'm going to undo this so that I get to where I have some x on the outside. So I'm going to pull x out of both of these. There's actually a math term, it's called factoring, but we'll get into that later. When we pull this out, we're dividing this by that x, but not really because there's still an x here. And seeing what's left, so negative p plus 8. And then after we get to this point, to get x by itself, we would divide both sides by what's inside. So when we do that, these cancel, and you're left with x equals negative 2 minus r all over negative p plus 8, which is one of the answers. So there's a lot going on there. I know I just went through that fast. Do we have questions on that? The other example you may see, is something that has parentheses. So here again we are solving for x, but we have an x inside parentheses. So in order to get that outside of the parentheses, we need to distribute. So we have 17n plus nx equals 34x minus r. And now we're kind of back where we were before, getting all of the variable we want on the same side, everything that doesn't have that variable on the opposite side. So I can move nx over here, or 34x over here, and get rid of 17n or r. So let's do this. These will cancel, these will cancel. So I have nx minus 34x equals negative r minus 17n. And then we do the same thing. Try to pull out that x, because both of these have it. So you'd have n minus 34 left. And then we could divide both sides by what's inside, n minus 34. Those would cancel. And then minus r, or negative r minus 17n all over n minus 34 would be an answer, or if you put the negative out in front, that could also be an answer. There are different variations to these. As long as the math is correct, it should mark you correct. But if the math is not correct, it'll mark you wrong. So somewhere here, something was wrong. Do we have any questions on that one? Again, I just went through that really fast for sake of time, but if you need help with this one, after you take your test, you may have time, so you can get help then, or you can come after school today, come see me in the morning tomorrow, either of those, and get help with that. Yes. Great. Yes, Nicole. Say that one more time. You can see it, but my word won't be up there again. One of these was that. All right. We're going to go over the quiz. I'm going to go over every single problem, talk about common mistakes I saw between all three of my AFDA classes. If you made that common mistake, also make sure you fix it. While I'm going over this, you should be fixing your own, so either on your quiz itself, or if you don't have space for that, you can do it on the back or grab another sheet of paper. That way you don't make those same mistakes for the test. If, as I'm going through it, if you're not sure why this was marked wrong or can't find the mistake, let me know, and I'll go through that. If you still have a question or something's still not making sense, ask so we can get that confusion straightened out. Okay. For the most part, you guys overall did well, so congrats. I think I had the most hundreds in this class. Again, so congrats. The first section, I feel like most of you did fairly well with that one. There were some issues, but it was really the second section that gave us the most trouble. So with number 1, we should have divided both sides by negative 67. I did see some adding. Maybe we thought we were subtracting, and then we did the opposite. These are next to one another, so they are multiplying. So to undo that, we would divide. And then this was negative 14. Make sure you're boxing in your answer, so I know this is your final, you're done. Be careful with your signs. Some of you did the math correctly, but then forgot to bring down your negative, which threw the answer off. All of these problems were worth 2 points, 1 for the answer, 1 for the work. And then I tried to not take off too much. But any mistake in the work I saw was minus 0.25. I don't believe in giving you a 0 unless you leave it blank. So even if you BS the entire quiz, I give you like 0.25 because you wrote something wrong. And then the 1 for the work, if your work was wrong, meaning your answer was wrong because of your work, you still got credit for the answer, but just not full credit. Questions on 1. 2, you needed to get rid of 8. The easiest way to do that would be subtract 8 on both sides. So negative 45 equals m was your final answer there. Questions on that one? Either you looking for paper? Yeah. You can just grab some off the top and just write on the back of whatever that is. Yeah. For number 3, you needed to combine your like terms first. So do whatever it says on the same side, add them together. And then make sure you're showing me all of your steps. You may not write this twice, but as long as you're showing me at least once so I can see your work. I do not assume anything with quizzes and tests, because if I assume you divided, then I could assume you added over here and subtracted, divided. I could assume your whole quiz and test. So I don't do that. Like, I know the correct way to do things and solve it, but I don't do that. So make sure you're showing me your entire process so I can follow your thinking. But after you divided, n equals 1, and that was your final answer for that one. I did see some like moving for n over, maybe not in this class, but then you would have had to move it back, so that was an unnecessary step. Be careful with your math. I got some zeros here, so always double check your math. Questions on 3? Those are like the easier of the 6. For 4, I think this was where I saw the most issues. 1, if you have fractions that equal each other, cross multiply and multiply this to everything here. Some of you cross multiplied but just multiplied 11 to x or 10 to x or 11 to -4 and 10 to -5, but not to both things, so just be careful there. Again, double check your math. For the most part, what I saw here was fine. I did see some 55s here. I think you were looking at 11, but multiplying by 5, so just be careful there. And then you had choices. So I think I saw a lot of moving 10x over and then adding 44. If you did it the other way, that's fine, as long as your math is correct. So this would give us x equals -6, or 1x equals -6. Either of those is fine, but that was your final answer. Do we have questions, confusion on that one? Did you have a question? Okay. 5, you had to distribute. Again, be careful with your math. Some of you were putting negatives where there weren't supposed to be, or vice versa, positives where there weren't supposed to be. Some of you were also forgetting your variables. So if you multiplied or distributed and forgot a variable, then you ended up combining terms that were not supposed to be like terms, so be very careful. Then I saw a lot of moving 4x over and adding 12. And again, being careful with our signs. If we had put this as a positive, then this makes this minus, which changes the entire problem. 10x equals 50, and then divide both sides by 10. So yeah, 5 was the correct answer for that one. Do we have any questions, concerns on 5? Six was similar, but you had to distribute twice. Combine your like terms, do whatever it says on the same side. So 16k, not 8k if you're subtracting, but you shouldn't have subtracted. And then -60k plus 48 minus 35k plus 63. If you got minus here, it threw the entire problem off, so be careful there. Combine your like terms. On the same side, not on opposite side, that would be you adding or subtracting to move it over. -60 minus 35 would give us a -95. And then 48 plus 63 would give us 111. A next, I'll say good step would be to move 95k over. Some of you did the opposite and move 16k over, which is not an incorrect step. You could do this, but anytime you move something from this side and there's nothing left, you have to put a 0. Which means you'll have to eventually move it back. So be careful with that. I'm going to erase this last time. So instead of doing that or avoiding that, you could add 95k to the other side. Then you wouldn't have to worry about moving it back. And then divide both sides by 111 and you get 1. I don't remember if it was in this class or other classes. Sometimes I saw like mistakes early on and then it carried all the way through. And somehow you still got the right answer. Like the math happened to work out that you still ended up getting 1. I thought that was interesting. But just be careful with your math. Sometimes that does happen, but purely by coincidence. Do we have any questions in general on the first section? For 7 and 8, there are multiple ways you could have done them. I'm going to show you all the different ways you could try with one of these problems, and then I'm just going to do it one way or another. So for 7, some of you may have done it this way, some of you may have done it another way, so I'll do that second way here in a second. Some of you may have taken this and added 4 to the other side. So we have z plus 4 equals negative 2a. And then divided the entire thing by negative 2. If you did that, we in math normally do not see the negative in the denominator. So you would need to do one of two things. Put the negative out front, but maybe put these in parentheses. That would be acceptable. Put the negative in front. Don't use parentheses, but then you'd have to change your signs. So negative z minus 4 over 2. That would be an acceptable answer. Some of you may have taken the negative 2 and divided separately. That would give you a different answer. So instead of doing this all together, if I divided both of these by negative 2, then this would look something like a equals negative z over 2 minus 2. So any of those could have been one of your answers. What could not have been one of your answers is if you tried to simplify this to be negative 2, but still left 2 underneath here. You can't simplify unless they're separated. So if you simplified and separated, that's fine. But if you simplified and left it all as 1, that was not. I'm going to show you the other way here in a second. But do we have questions about that one? So that way is dealing with the negative. If we got rid of the negative, we could do this. So instead of doing exactly what we just did, adding 4 divided by negative 2, I could instead add 2a to the other side. We have 2a plus z equals negative 4. Get rid of z by subtracting. So now when I divide, it won't be by a negative. And then you, again, have a couple choices. Divide everything by 2. So a is that negative 4 minus z over a, which we have one of those answers already. Or divide them separately. That wasn't supposed to be a, it was supposed to be 2. So there were 3 really different answers, but 2 different ways to do it. Same thing applies to 8, but I'm not going through all of those again. Okay, so pick which way you feel more comfortable with, and just make sure your math makes sense. If I do something to one side, I have to move it to the other. It doesn't disappear, it doesn't combine. I'm just simply moving it to the other side. Do we have questions on that one? Eight is going to move a little faster. For 8, similar, but at the end when I divide by 3, I won't need to separate. So I could, divide by 2. Subtract by 3 as one method. Divide everything by negative 2. I'm going to do this all at the same time because nothing would simplify. But change my position of my negative. So either put it in parentheses or change my signs. Either of those would be your answer for this one. Some of you could have still divided separately, and I counted that as right if you did it correctly. If you divided separately and had 1.5 minus g, that was incorrect because the g is not dividing by 2, so be careful there. Do we have any questions on that one? All the other ones will go much faster because there weren't as many steps. For 9, we needed to get x by itself. The only thing around x is c, so we could subtract c to the other side, not to d and negative r, just to the other side in general. And you're left with x equals d minus r minus c, and that'd be your answer. Or you could put it in alphabetic order. But either of those would be fine. Some of you were moving D and R, which was fine, but you would have had to move it back. So don't create extra steps if you can move it. 10, there were 2 different ways to go about it, kind of similar to those. 1, get rid of C by moving it to the other side. But some of you did this and then forgot the negative. So you still have to bring down your signs. It would not be by itself. So in order to get rid of that negative, we have to divide both sides by -1. And your signs would change. You can't just divide it and leave it. This would become a negative D, a negative R, and a positive C. So all of your signs would change because you're dividing by a negative. Does anyone need or want to see the second way to do this one? For 11, if we're getting A by itself, C is the only thing next to A. These are next to one another, so they're multiplying. So to get rid of that, we would divide both sides by C to leave us with A equals D minus R all over C. Do you have any questions on that one? 12, you have to get A by itself. M is near it, so if we get rid of that, A will be by itself. And if you wanted to put it in order, you could do that, but either or does not matter. Do we have any questions on this, any of these, this section in general? Does everyone understand where they made mistakes at? And no one has any questions about it. As a reminder, your test grades will replace your 2 quiz grades. If higher, if lower, they'll stay. We'll talk about retakes next week.